They told a black firefighter to move out of family seating at his son's graduation, but no one expected what happened next when 7 Navy SEALs slowly stood without a word. Don't go anywhere. This story starts quietly, but by the end, it will leave you speechless. Elijah Mays pulled into the back lot behind Franklin High School in his old Ford F-150, the one with soot still buried in the upholstery from a church fire 15 years back. The June air in southern Texas was thick, buzzing with the scent of fresh-cut grass and sunscreen, and the kind of restless pride that comes with graduation day. He parked between a battered minivan covered in honor student stickers and a Cadillac with helium balloons tied to the mirror. The sun hit the windshield just right, flashing across the cracked dashboard as Elijah took a slow breath and stared at the main entrance. He'd fought fires on 4 continents, run into a burning elementary school when others hesitated, and carried his late wife through chemo without breaking. But this, sitting still to watch his only son walk the stage, hit something different. The gym building stood like every public school built in the early 90s. Bleached brick, metal awning, flags snapping overhead. From a distance, it looked calm. Up close, it was buzzing. Families in Sunday dresses and pressed polos shuffled toward the doors. A toddler screamed over the roar of an air horn. Balloons bounced off the roof of a food truck parked near the field. Elijah stepped out of the truck, adjusted the collar of his dark blue Class A uniform, and smoothed the creases along his thighs. He wasn't showing off. He didn't know how to show up any other way. His boots were clean, his hands calloused, his presence anchored. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a faded photo. His wife, Rochelle, holding baby Marcus in front of the firehouse Christmas tree. He pressed the photo to his chest, then slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "I told you I wouldn't miss this," he whispered. The gym doors opened in a clatter, a flood of voices, sneakers, folding chairs scraping concrete. Elijah moved through the crowd slowly. A woman brushed past him with a bouquet of carnations. A teenage boy cursed when he dropped his program. Elijah never stopped walking. When he reached the entrance, a volunteer in khakis and a headset scanned his ticket, squinted at it, then nodded. "You're up front. 3rd row, left side. Family seating." "Appreciate it," Elijah said, and stepped into the sea of plastic chairs and echoing voices. The air inside was a mix of floor polish, popcorn, and teenage nerves. He took his seat, adjusted it once, wobbly but manageable, and looked up at the stage. Silver letters stretched across the wall. Class of 2024. He spotted Marcus in the lineup, tall, lean, cap slightly crooked, fidgeting with his honor cords. Elijah's breath caught for half a second. 18 years in a blink. He didn't clap with the others when the processional music started. He didn't need to. His entire body was a salute. What he didn't know, what no one in that gym knew, was that a storm of silence was about to shift the entire room, and it would start right where he was sitting. The first time Elijah Mays walked through fire, it wasn't a metaphor. It was a Tuesday morning, 17 years ago, just outside Baton Rouge. A daycare center had gone up in flames, with 22 children still inside. Elijah was the first man through the door and the last one out. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't calculate risk. He just heard crying through the smoke and ran toward it. He would later be told the roof collapsed 90 seconds after he carried the last baby girl out in his arms. Both of them soaked in sweat, soot, and survival. That story would make the news. A photo of him kneeling, oxygen mask pulled down, holding a toddler to his chest like his own daughter would win awards. But Elijah never brought it up. Not at barbecues, not even to his wife. Hero wasn't a word he wore comfortably. He called it doing his job. That fire left a scar down his right forearm, the kind that looked like bark on a tree. When kids at Marcus's school asked what happened, Elijah would grin and say, "Fell asleep on a hot griddle." Only Rochelle ever saw the nights when he woke up gasping, palms clenched, heart racing from dreams full of flame and silence. Even now, seated in the third row of the gym, that scar peaked just below the sleeve of his uniform. And it wasn't the only one he carried. He had seen death up close more times than he could count. Hurricane Katrina. The warehouse collapsed in Mobile. That Christmas Eve pileup outside Dallas, where he pulled a family of 5 from a wrecked Suburban, while paramedics begged him to stop and wait for help. Elijah never waited. He moved when it counted. That's why the SEALs respected him. Not because he wore a badge, not because he stood tall, but because he ran into hell with the same calm they did. Years back, on a rare day off, he'd joined a veterans fundraiser where he'd met Deke Harris, a Navy SEAL who recognized Elijah from an old rescue story. Turned out Elijah had helped evacuate Harris's younger brother during a flash flood 5 years earlier. From that moment, a bond formed. No uniform required. When Rochelle passed away after a brutal battle with cancer, those men didn't send flowers. They showed up. No announcement. No drama. They held the line at the funeral home door, stood in silence as the service ended, and drove 3 hours home without saying a word. That's how Elijah knew what real brotherhood looked like. It wasn't loud. It didn't chase credit. It just was. And today, even though he hadn't told a soul outside of Marcus that he'd be here, a few of those brothers had somehow known, not by phone, not by message, but by instinct, the kind born in fire and sharpened by time. And as the band in the gym started warming up and the energy of the crowd swelled, Elijah felt it. Not just pride, but presence. He wasn't alone. Not today. Not ever. Elijah didn't notice them at first. He was focused on the stage, scanning the lineup of students until his eyes landed on Marcus. That cap still wouldn't sit straight. Elijah smiled slightly, his body still and upright, like it had been wired into the chair. But then a shift in energy brushed the side of his awareness, the kind of presence you feel before you hear it. 2 men in black security polos were walking down the left aisle, cutting a straight path toward him. Their badges read Allied Private Services, and their strides were all business. The taller one had a close-shaved head, shades perched on his collar, chewing gum like he owned the building. The shorter one was broad, square-jawed, and carried a radio on his belt like he was waiting for an excuse to use it. They moved with that quiet kind of authority that tries to stay invisible, but never does. Elijah clocked them without turning his head. Years of command presence taught him one thing above all: stillness draws more power than motion. The short one leaned in just slightly, voice low. "Excuse me, sir. I'm going to need you to come with us for a moment." No explanation, no question. Just a subtle command dressed like a favor. Elijah's voice came back calm, clipped. "Is there a problem?" The tall one stepped forward. "Yeah, actually, this section's for the immediate family." Elijah didn't blink. He reached into his coat and pulled out the same ticket he'd shown at the front. "Third row, left side. That's what it says. That's my seat." The short guard didn't even look at the ticket. "We got word this row's full. We can seat you in the back." The tone wasn't aggressive, not yet, but it carried something colder. Elijah paused, then looked straight ahead. "It was full when I sat down too." "So who gave you that word?" The taller one shifted. "Look, let's not make this into something. We're just asking for cooperation." Elijah turned to face him, calm as ever. "I drove 4 hours to see my son graduate. I'll be sitting right here." A couple in the row behind them stopped whispering. A teenager 2 rows up tilted his phone, maybe filming. The short guard's voice dropped half a notch. "Sir, I'm gonna have to insist." Elijah didn't flinch. "You can insist all you like." And there it was, that pause in the air. That almost invisible moment when tension tightens like a drawn bow. The tall guard raised his chin. Maybe you'd be more comfortable toward the back. That word again. Comfortable. It didn't mean what it said. It never did. Elijah didn't answer. Not with words. Just the kind of stare that holds a whole history behind it. And as the guards hovered, unsure what to do next, none of them realized what was coming. But you will, because what happens next flips everything. Don't miss what's about to unfold. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to follow X Daily Stories, where every silence has a voice and every story leaves a mark. The gym door at the far end opened with a soft metallic click, the kind most people wouldn't notice over the echo of applause and squeaky folding chairs. But Elijah noticed. He didn't turn his head. He didn't have to. Something in his gut shifted the moment the first man walked in. Tall, broad, shaved head, eyes sweeping the room like he was memorizing exits. He wore jeans, a black coat, and a quiet kind of command that didn't ask permission. He took a seat 2 rows from the aisle on the right. 30 seconds later, another entered from the opposite doors. Then a third. Then 4. One by one, they filtered in. Not in formation, not together, but with a rhythm you could feel if you paid close enough attention. They sat in different sections, like strangers, but their postures matched. Shoulders squared, back straight, hands resting evenly on knees or folded calmly in their laps. No fidgeting, no talking, just steady presence, sharp eyes, and the kind of composure you only learn from moving through fire. 7 of them in total. And anyone looking closely could see it. They weren't watching the stage. They were watching Elijah. They hadn't announced themselves. They hadn't come in as a unit. But they were a unit. A brotherhood was sealed years ago. Deke Harris was among them, the same man Elijah had pulled from a wrecked Black Hawk in northern Iraq. Back then, Deke had a broken leg and a collapsed lung. Elijah carried him 2 miles through enemy fire without stopping once. That moment was never written in a report. There were no medals, just breath and blood and a bond that stuck. And now Deke was here, standing watch, just like the others. No one had called them. Elijah hadn't said a word. But they knew. Whether it was instinct, loyalty, or something stronger, they showed up. Not loud, not proud, just a present. The guards hadn't noticed them yet, not really. They were still locked in the slow dance of trying to remove Elijah without making a scene, unaware that the very air around them had shifted. There's a weight to a room when men like that step inside. Men who've crawled through sand, waited in silence for a green light, and held brothers in their arms as the last breath left their body. That weight doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just is. And now it was in the gym, wrapped around the folding chairs, pressed into the hardwood floor, whispering to anyone with the sense that something had changed. Elijah still hadn't moved. His back was straight, his gaze fixed on the stage. But a different kind of stillness surrounded him now, a fortified stillness, a message without words. And while the crowd kept clapping for names being called, something quieter was building beneath it all. Don't look away, because this story's not slowing down, it's just beginning. And what happens next will stay with you long after the applause fades. Brax's hand drifted to the radio clipped on his belt, his thumb hovering over the button like it itched to escalate. Kilroy took a small step closer, narrowing the space between him and Elijah until his belt brushed the side of Elijah's knee. "Sir," he said again, louder this time, his tone tightening. "This is your final warning." Elijah didn't move. His gaze stayed forward, jaw set, posture steady as stone. "To do what exactly?" he asked, his voice quiet but unshakable. Kilroy leaned down farther, close enough now that Elijah could smell the breath mints he was nervously chewing. "To stop making a scene. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just move to the back." Elijah turned his head slowly, his stare locking with Kilroy's. "You're the only one making a scene. The pause that followed was electric. Around them, conversations fell silent. A father holding a camcorder stopped mid-zoom. A young girl stopped swinging her legs and looked over with wide eyes. Brax's jaw flexed, then he snapped. "You think that uniform makes you better than everybody else?" he said. Not loud, but with venom leaking through every word. "This isn't your firehouse. This is a high school." The air in the gym tightened. Even Kilroy looked sideways at Brax like he'd gone too far. Elijah blinked once, not in shock, in warning. And then it happened. One man stood, then another, then 5 more, all across the gym, each one rising without a word. Each one different in build, in dress, in posture, but all moving with the same quiet authority. 7 men, 7 SEALs, silent, watching, standing sentinel like they'd done in deserts, jungles, and cities the rest of the country never saw. Kilroy's mouth opened, then closed. Brax looked around, suddenly unsure. Elijah didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just turned his head back toward the stage like nothing had changed, but everything had. The guards were no longer alone. The room wasn't backing them anymore. And those 7 standing men weren't asking. They were waiting, waiting to see if the line had to be drawn right there. Don't blink. Because what's coming next? Nobody in that gym was ready for it. And neither are you. The tall SEAL near the right bleachers finally stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying weight like a steel beam. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" he asked, not loud, but enough to hush the 10 feet around him. Brax turned, caught off guard. "Excuse me." The man didn't blink. "That's Elijah Mays, battalion chief. He pulled my brother out of a collapsed chemical plant in Port Arthur before the second tank blew. He didn't have to be there, he wasn't on duty, but he went in anyway." A ripple moved through the nearest rows like a wind hitting wheat. Heads turned. One of the assistant principals whispered into her walkie. An elderly woman near the aisle gasped softly, then leaned toward her granddaughter. "That's the man who saved the Watson twins from the church fire." On the far side, another SEAL stepped into the aisle. "He carried my cousin out of a flipped SUV on I-35. We were kids. He didn't even take credit." Brax's expression shifted, eyes scanning the crowd as if realizing, for the first time, that he'd misjudged the room. Kilroy straightened, but didn't speak. And Elijah didn't turn. He just sat, still composed, eyes on the stage, hands resting steady on his thighs. It wasn't pride. It wasn't ego. It was presence. Earned, proven, and now unmistakable. The tall SEAL walked closer. "You were told this man was a problem. I'm telling you, he's the reason 3 men in this room are still breathing." Then he stopped. "You want to make a move on him? You'll have to go through us." No threat, no theatrics, just fact, the kind you can't argue with. A moment passed. Brax took a step back. Kilroy looked at the principal, now approaching fast with urgency in her eyes. And everyone else? They weren't looking at the stage anymore. They were watching this. All of it. And if you think that was the peak, keep listening. Because the most powerful moment is still to come. And when it does, you'll feel it, just like everyone in that gym did. Marcus Mays stood in line behind a girl with glitter on her cap and a boy who kept adjusting his gown like it was made of sandpaper. His heart pounded, not from nerves about walking the stage, but from something deeper. From the moment the national anthem ended, he'd seen the guards moving toward his father. At first, he thought maybe they were helping with seating, but then he saw the way his dad sat, still, shoulders square, eyes forward, like he'd locked into something no one else could see. Marcus had seen that look before. When he was 10 and cried after hearing a slur on the playground, his dad didn't yell. He just sat beside him, hand on his shoulder, solid as stone. Now, standing in a row of caps and gowns, Marcus knew something was unfolding behind him. He couldn't hear the words, but the tension traveled across the gym like heat. Then he saw a man rise, then another, then more. Their movements were quiet but sharp, like chess pieces sliding into place. That's when he realized these men weren't strangers. They were there for his father. They knew him, and they stood for him. The temperature in Marcus's chest changed. Not fear, not even anger. It was pride, the kind that presses behind your eyes and makes you stand taller without meaning to. He didn't move, didn't step out of line, but inside, something shifted. He'd heard pieces of his dad's past, rescue stories, old news clippings, faded photos. But this wasn't a story. This was now. And everyone in that gym was about to find out what he already knew. Elijah Mays wasn't just a father, he was a force. Marcus took a slow breath, clenched the card with his name, and stepped forward in line. You're not going to want to miss what happens when his name is called. And if this moment's hitting you like it hit him, make sure you subscribe to X Daily Stories, where real strength speaks louder than words, and legacies are never left behind. Names kept echoing from the podium, one after another. But for most of the gym, the real moment hadn't arrived yet. People clapped out of habit, but their eyes kept drifting to the third row on the left, where Elijah Mays still sat like a monument, unshaken, unmoved. On stage, the assistant principal adjusted the microphone and glanced briefly toward the crowd, her voice steadier now than it had been all ceremony. Then she paused, cleared her throat, and said it with unmistakable clarity. Marcus Elijah Mays. For half a second, the room held its breath. And then it erupted, not in scattered cheers or nervous applause, but in something deeper. The 7 SEALs, still standing, clapped in unison, slow, deliberate, each strike echoing like a drum. Others joined in, not loud, but solid, as if the sound itself carried respect. Marcus stepped onto the stage, his chin high, every step calm and certain. He took the diploma with a steady hand, shook the principals, then turned to face the audience. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found the only person he was looking for. Elijah didn't wave, didn't nod. He simply met his son's gaze and offered the smallest, proudest smile a father could give. Marcus held that look for a second longer, then stepped off the stage, heart pounding. Not with nerves, but with something bigger, something that felt like legacy. And what happens next proves that the most powerful graduation gift isn't paper. It's presence. Keep listening. The caps had flown, the cheers had faded, and the crowd poured into the hallways like a river finally breaking its banks. But Elijah Mays didn't move. He sat there for a moment longer in the plastic chair that had become a witness to something greater than a ceremony.
Around him, families hugged, balloons bobbed, and kids shouted for their next selfie, but his world was still locked on the memory of his son's walk across that stage. Slowly, he stood, knees stiff from sitting so long, but his posture was still perfect. He stepped into the aisle just as Deke Harris approached, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "You good?" Deke asked. Elijah nodded once. Better than good. Another SEAL joined them, then another. No words needed. Just presence. Always presence. They weren't here for medals or thank yous. They had done what men like them always did. Showed up when it mattered. Elijah gave them each a look, something between gratitude and command, then said quietly, "Go find your people. I've got mine." Outside, Marcus stood by the flagpole, gown unzipped, diploma folder under one arm. When he spotted his father, he stepped forward fast, then slowed like he didn't want to ruin the moment. "They tried to move you," Marcus said, voice tight. Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder. "And you saw I didn't go." Marcus nodded. "I was ready to walk off that stage." Elijah looked him square in the eye. "That's why you didn't. Because you knew I had it handled." And just like that, a lifetime of lessons passed between them without needing to be said. Stay with us, because one more moment is still waiting.